Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel, and in today's episode I want to talk about how to deal with an aggressive ball python. And I have to say that 99% of the time most ball pythons are really non-aggressive, and it's really what makes them a really good pet as far as not biting anybody. But there are occasionally you'll get a few ball pythons that are aggressive, and I actually have a couple here that I want to show you, and I've had some over the years, and I've actually got them out of the aggression mode and turned them into really friendly animals. And I want to show you some of the tips and tricks on how to convert an aggressive ball python into a friendly ball python, and some of the reasons why ball pythons are aggressive in the first place. Alright, so before we jump into today's topic of discussion, I want to remind you guys of an upcoming reptile show. It's the Reptilian Nation coming to Denver. It's February 23rd and 24th. So it's still about 2 months away, and I'm reserving a table. I'll be there with all my ball python hatchlings, and I'll probably have, I'd say, at least 40 hatchlings for sale. And I'm thinking about bringing some Pac-Man frogs, making a really big order online, and bringing some to the show and kind of get a variety of different frogs as well. Okay, so when we think about aggression of snakes in general, I started handling snakes, I would say, from a very young age. And I can remember back when I was probably 8 years old, and I used to go out behind the house. Luckily, we didn't have venomous snakes in Wisconsin where I grew up, and it was mostly garter snakes. And I found out early on that you could catch a wild snake, and typically if you catch a wild garter snake, the first thing it's going to do is bite you, and it'll musk on you and pee and try to get away. And if you hold that snake for, when I was a kid, I had all the time in the world, so we'd hold them pretty much all day. But it seemed like after an hour or two, that snake would transform from an extremely aggressive snake to one of the most friendliest snakes. You wouldn't believe it. It was almost like we charmed the snakes. I was a snake charmer early on, and we charmed garter snakes. And when you first catch a snake, I think it's really afraid of you actually hurting the snake, and it doesn't really know your intentions. And I think it's pretty much the same with ball pythons. The first thing you really have to do is convey your intentions to the snake as far as not intending it to do any harm to the snake. So let me show you this clown female that I bought just last year. Actually, I bought it as a hatchling, and the guy I bought it from said it was one of his meanest snakes, and he couldn't quite figure out why the snake was so mean. And let me just pull this tub out here, and she looks like she's kind of going into a shed a little bit. I'm pairing her up so she's breeding. And she's kind of surprised that I'm picking her up. But let me tell you, within a week of having the snake, we transformed the snake from one of the meanest snakes to one of the gentlest snakes. And what I did with the help of some friends and family is I actually held on to the snake and just held it for, I would say, a good 2 to 3 hours. And typically, some people say you should pick up a snake and handle it, every day to kind of to tame it down. And the thing with a ball python is, if you pick up the snake, typically what it'll do is, if it's really afraid, you can tell the snake is not afraid at all with the flicking of the tongue and being curious. This is not a frightened snake. This is a snake being comfortable being held. And really what it takes is, if you pick up a snake for 20 minutes a day, especially one that's afraid of you, I guarantee a ball python will ball up into a ball and it won't move. And if you hold that snake while it's balled up, you are not really doing that snake a favor as far as taming it down. And what you really need to do is you really need to hold on to the snake until it relaxes. And you can tell it's relaxed by the way it's moving its head and coming out of the ball. This one, we held it, I would say, early on, we held it for that first day for about 3 hours. And after the initial handling session of about 3 hours, this snake was completely charmed. It was completely transformed, and it was definitely not the same snake even almost a year later, it remembered that experience, and it totally transformed this snake. So being on the breeding side of the business, I'm not really too concerned about the aggression of ball pythons. As a matter of fact, I have a ball python here that's fairly aggressive, and I haven't really worked with it to really tame it down, and that is my bumblebee. And this thing is always I pretty much know why it's fearful. When I first got the snake, it was a little hatchling. It's been a couple years since I got it. I actually got it through the mail. And when I first got it, it was pretty beat up from the trip. And and I know this snake, if I held it too long, it would actually snap at me. And ball pythons are pretty easy. You can just keep the head away, and they really can't reach out and grab you. As far as hopefully it can't really grab me. But the thing we did with this snake is when we first got it, I didn't have any rack system set up, and I was actually waiting on one of my first racks to house this, and I had this rack over here, and it was completely filled up with ball pythons. And then I believe it was this rack, these 50-40 tubs that I had ordered, and I was waiting on getting them in the mail, and I didn't really have anywhere to put this girl. So what I did, it was a mistake on my part, is I actually set up a glass aquarium in my kitchen with a little cardboard hide, and I put this snake right from the shipping box right into that cardboard hide box. And look at that. That snake's looking at me like it wants a piece of me. and what that actually did is the snake was really shook up from being transported, and then I put it into that glass enclosure where it could see me, and it thought that I was the reason that it got beat up, and it did not trust me. And it seemed like from that point on, it definitely held a grudge against me. And this snake, I can guarantee, if we stand here long enough, that thing is going to strike at me. I'd say it's one of my most aggressive ball pythons. But as a breeder, I'm not really concerned about it. I can avoid taking a bite, and it's I could work with that snake and I could tame it down, but I have so many snakes that it doesn't really bother me that it's aggressive, and I try not to handle it that much, and it feeds fine, and it breeds fine. It's just if I stand here long enough looking at it, it will definitely take a shot at me. So when I was just a kid growing up in Wisconsin catching wild garter snakes, one thing I really learned about charming snakes is that it was much easier to catch and charm a younger snake, because typically they would bite you, and taking a bite from a small snake isn't really a big deal. And if we caught some of the really big garter snakes, and they, let me tell you, when they took a bite of us, we'd have blood running down our elbows, and it was pretty crazy. But we would eventually tame them. It was just a lot more difficult. And the other thing I kind of found is, especially for catching wild snakes, that if they've recently eaten, typically the bigger snakes, they would regurgitate a rat going through the process of taming down a snake. So we typically only like to catch the small snakes. And for example, for that bumblebee, if I wanted to tame her down, probably what I would do is I would hold that snake for about 3 hours, and I'd maintain contact all the time. So you don't really want to set it on the table next to you, because it'll go into a defensive mode or it'll go into a feeding mode, and you could potentially make things worse. What you really want to do is have physical contact with the snake for a solid 2 to 3 hours, and that snake would tame down. But the only thing is, if you try to tame down a bigger snake, you risk taking a bite earlier on, and with a bigger snake, you would definitely hurt more than if you had something small. Okay, so when we're talking about the aggression of snakes, I would say typically your ball python hatchlings are probably the most aggressive and defensive, especially for a larger breeder, someone breeding, if you have more than a handful of snakes, I would say, you get to the point where I was this year with 100 snakes, and obviously you can't go through all your snakes all the time and handle them and tame them down. A lot of people walk up to my table and they ask, is that hatchling aggressive? And I would say typically, if it's coming from a breeder, most of them have not been, they're not used to being held. And a lot of my snakes here, the hatchlings, if I pull them out, a lot of times they will hiss at me, and normally they won't really snap and take a bite. But this one didn't hiss. And they're getting to the point where, I've been shooting so many videos that they're not really that aggressive. But some of these, when you first pull them out, they'll hiss at you. And that one's not hissing either. Yeah, I pretty much tamed these down just by kind of going through them and showing them off in my different videos. Let me see, maybe this pastel will give us a good hiss. Yeah, that one's hissing. So this one, I would say this is one of my more defensive ball pythons. It's just because this is not used to being held. And you can hear it hissing some more. She's like, she's not happy. And the thing is with this ball python is this one just does not trust me. It doesn't know my intent. And really, for ball pythons, the thing about an aggressive ball python, especially for a hatchling, is they will tame down super fast. As long as you can build some trust and you're not really hurting the snake or scaring it, it'll calm down really fast. And especially with hatchlings, I could hold this thing for maybe 5 or 10 minutes and it will really calm down. It'll go from a hissing, sometimes a really biting, snapping snake to one of the most tame snakes. And I would suggest if you get a ball python at the very beginning, it's a new snake, I would suggest holding that snake for maybe 2 or 3 hours. And a lot of people say you shouldn't really hold the snake at first, but I think it really helps to calm them down and to build some trust. So I'd say one of the things you definitely want to do if you're trying to tame a snake is to try to tame it as early as possible. And I had some of these reticulated pythons. Lucy, thank goodness she was a tame snake. She got up to 50 pounds. And I couldn't imagine trying to tame a 50-pound snake. And I've seen some really big snakes that are extremely defensive. And let me tell you, trying to hold a snake that big and tame them down, risking a bite from a big snake is pretty crazy. I wouldn't recommend it. So the sooner you can hold your snake and the longer you can hold it, I would say the better it is for taming that snake down. So in this video we're talking mainly about ball pythons. And I think ball pythons are naturally friendly by nature. And it's really easy to tame them down. If you took any ball python, even the meanest one, and you held that snake for a few hours, I can almost guarantee it that within a few hours that snake is going to be really tame. Versus if you had some other snakes that are, I would say, hardwired for aggression. Some snakes are a lot harder, and some of those you can tame them down, but it takes a lot more work, such as the green tree python or the blood pythons or some rat snakes. It definitely take a lot more to tame those snakes and keep them tame for the long term versus ball pythons. Okay, so that's pretty much it for my discussion of ball python aggression. I can almost guarantee that if you have an aggressive ball python and you hold that snake for a few hours, it is going to tame down really fast. And don't forget about the Reptilian Nation coming to Denver in about 2 months. Hope to see you there. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.